So I'm taking a look at the first game in the StarForce Trilogy from SPI, which is StarForce. This is, I guess it's the first game. I think it came out first. Predated both Outreach and Star Soldier. It's been interesting so far as I've read through the rules. It's kind of not what I was expecting. My initial thought was that, okay, interstellar conflict, it's a map of the galaxy with a number of different star systems listed on it. At the center here on the map is Sol, or our own solar system with Earth. At the center of the map, the next closest star, Alpha Centauri, and then various systems ranging out accordingly out on the rest of the map. My view of it was that, okay, well, this is probably going to be an operational, if not a 4X type game, then you're going to be doing some managing of, resources or economy or fleets or something. No, you're not doing any of that. This is literally move and fight, and that's all there is. It's plotted movement. So the first thing I thought of was, so this is actually more like a Napoleonic era ship combat game. Think of Close Action or Flying Colors or something like that, where you're literally just executing a tactical scenario. Except it's not tactical. It's almost like it's operational. But there's none of the tropes of an operational game. You're kind of at an operational level where you are organizing fleet assaults on star systems. Essentially, you want to capture these stargates in opposing systems. And this intro scenario, it's actually the humans are fighting each other. So I'm using the human StarForce counters for both sides. I guess I could have used, there's some green counters, but that's for some alien race called the Shalda. There's some yellow counters. It's for some race called the Rame. And then there are some black counters for the xenophobes, which are, all these are specific to certain scenarios. The humans are the blue counters. So, in theory, I could just use whatever color I wanted to distinguish the two. But I'm just using two blue counters because I already know what the forces are, and I know who's where. You've got a Stargate at Alpha Centauri, which is a star system in rebellion. I'm going to take the forces here and destroy the forces in Alpha Centauri. So you're managing these fleets, and this scale of this, since you're dealing with star systems here, feels operational to me, because there's a basic game where you do all the fighting here, but in the advanced game, you have this other display over here, the tactical display, and this is where you actually fight out the battles that occur in the different star systems on the stellar map. So there's your tactical game. So what is this then? Operational, I guess. But there is literally nothing here in the sequence of play. You've got the stellar shift plot phase. That's where you do all your movement plotting. Then you have your execution segment, your safe shifts, when you're not overshifting an overshifting segment. Then your Zulu coordinate readout segment, where everybody says, hey, if we're in the same hex, since this map, and I'll get into this, but the map is a 3-dimensional map, it's not a 2-dimensional map. So you could have people in the same hex that aren't actually in the same space. So that's where you have to read out these Zulu coordinates, and you've got your 3-dimensional space in a hex is called a light Zulu in the game. So you could be in a light, which is just a hex, but if you're not in the same light Zulu, then you don't fight. You're not actually in the same space. So that's what this Zulu coordinate readout segment is. Then you execute combat. If you're playing the basic game, you'll just do your combat on the basic combat on the stellar map. If you're playing the advanced game, then the combat will move to the tactical map and have quite a few more steps to it. Then you go to the stellar neutralization recovery phase, and that's it. You just do it over and over again until you reach the objectives for the particular scenario that you are taking part in, or that you're doing. So the scenarios, there is some difference in the scenarios. Indeed, that's where the only difference in the game is. Otherwise, you would just be doing the same thing over and over. So there can be some variety to the scenarios. I'm starting with just the intro scenario, which is the Alpha Centauri campaign. A Alpha Centauri system rebels, and you have to go crush the rebellion. So you get 4 star forces for the Sol forces and 1 for the Alpha Centauri player. It's not balanced. 4 star forces should pretty easily defeat 1 star force. And all you have to do is neutralize the Alpha Centauri Stargate within 4 turns, tactical turns, which means this they recommend you use the advanced game for this intro scenario. So you'll actually do the fighting on the tactical map. But really, for the rest of the scenarios, it's pretty much the same thing. Here's your starting forces, in which systems they start in, victory conditions. You got to either take out stargates or eliminate star forces, and that's all she wrote. There's no, you're not managing your star forces. You're not building more star forces. You're not building stargates. You start with the units you start with, and try and kill as many as you can, and take the objectives, and the game is over. So it seemed weird to me, or seemed thin, until I thought, well, it's not any different than something like Flying Colors, where your tactical scenario is eliminate all the ships. There's not a whole lot for you to do on the map itself. You'll just be moving around in 3-dimensional space with your plotted moves. And indeed, that's the most complicated part of the game, is thinking that, okay, each hex has a certain number of vertical points in it. And you can see here plus minus 21, then out into the other zone plus minus 19. So that 3-dimensional space increases and decreases towards the center and towards the edge of the galaxy. So you have to plot your movement within that plane and move around between the different star systems. So essentially, it's not going to be, nobody's going to be running into each other in open space. You can't create a perimeter or anything like that, because people can just plot right past it through 3-dimensional space. So it's really a game about maximizing your forces in particular star systems. Probably feinting towards one star system and then attacking in force at another star system. There's no real... Again, there's nothing for you to do with your forces, since you can't get more forces you want to make sure you win the combats that you're in. So in the designer notes, they talked about it being like two karate fighters sort of dancing around each other and feinting at each other, towards each other, without actually hitting each other, until somebody's ready to hit in such a way that it's guaranteed to be fatal. Of course, that's the real trick then, in trying to figure out when that would be. So for this intro scenario, since there's only one destination, it's literally just to, hey, play this scenario to learn how you plot your movement, learn how to do tactical combat in an unbalanced scenario, so it'll be over quickly. There's literally no feinting or trickery to be had because there's only two systems involved, and the one StarForce and Alpha Centauri is too small to have any effect on the Sol system. So obviously the other scenarios where you have a lot more star systems involved will be a bigger or more involved strategy where you can feint at different systems and then try and bring a hammer blow down on certain other systems to try and meet whatever your victory conditions are, or take whatever systems you need to. So with that sort of brief intro in mind, I'm not going to go through specific rules explanation. I'm just going to start playing, and I will explain the rules for movement and plotting and things like that as I do them. Alright, so I'm getting underway with the Alpha Centauri scenario, where I've got 4 Star Forces and a Stargate here in Sol. They're going to be shifting to the Stargate and Alpha Centauri, and it's one defending Star Force. So what you do is to your plotting, and in this case these 4 Star Forces are going to be shifting from hex 2020/0, which is the Sol coordinates, to, and it's kind of hard to see on this, particularly since I've got some glare from the plexi on here, but Alpha Centauri is at 1821/-4. So when you're shifting to a star system with an enemy Stargate in it, which this one has, that's the whole objective of this scenario, you have to add 4 lights to your coordinates, which means these units here, they're 2 hexes away, planar differential, 4 with a Zulu differential of 4, because you're going from a /0, a 0 Zulu to a -4 Zulu. So you would look on the handy dandy planar, or a true light distance chart here, and your planar differential is across the top, your Zulu differential is the bottom. So you're looking at a planar differential of 2 hexes with a Zulu differential of 4, gives you a true light distance of 4. However, since I'm shifting to a hex with a enemy Stargate in it, I have to add 4 lights to that, which makes my effective shift distance 8. Which is more than a Star Force can shift unassisted. A Star Force shifting unassisted can only shift 5. So I'd either have to overshift, or, fortunately, since I have a Stargate here, I can use what's called a gate shift, and so this Stargate allows me to assist my shift. And when you do a gate shift, that gives you a distance you can shift of 10, which is more than enough to shift the 8 that I need to shift to Alpha Centauri. Now, ordinarily you'd be restricted in doing a gate shift to 2 Star Forces unless all your Star Forces are traveling to exactly the same location. In this case they are, and in that case you can do up to 4 Star Forces, which conveniently is exactly the number that we have. So how we do that is write it out on the plotting sheet. And technically I would write this out for forces A, B, C, and D, but they're all going the same place. So in fact what I would probably do here is just do kind of this thing. They're all doing the same function. And so that would be the plot. You're plotting from 2020/0, a gate shift, to 1821/-4. And so what happens there is these star forces, and there's no traversing. You can't intercept or anything. Nobody's traversing these gates. This is the science fiction of the game, is that, you know, think of Dune, where you're folding space. So what they're doing is literally leaving this space and appearing in this space instantaneously. So that's what your shifting is. Now that they're all there, we will proceed to the tactical combat phase, which I will show in the next segment. Alright, so I've got my forces set up on the tactical display. And again, because these are humans fighting humans, they're the same color. It'll just be the numbers on the actual counter that will be the determining factor. So this is counter E, which is the Alpha Centauri defenders. Here is their Stargate, and the actual star itself marked in the center hex. The star is actually at coordinate 000-1. The Stargate is at 000/0. The Stargate is the objective for the attacking units. These units, the attacking star forces, because they shifted into the system, they enter the tactical display in what's called stellar mode, which is a mode better suited for travel rather than fighting. So the first thing they want to do when they get there is to devote some of their tac shift points to changing to battle mode. Unlike the main map, the tactical map, each unit has a certain number of points called telepoints that they will use to do their plotting, either tac shifting, changing mode from stellar to battle mode, or from battle to stellar mode, breaking off, which they have to do in stellar mode and only in the second execution phase. Combat casts, which is where they're actually quote-unquote firing at enemy units. And essentially a combat cast, think of it as like an area effect attack that comes out in a 60-degree arc, a three-dimensional 60-degree arc from the actual unit. And then anti-cast, which is essentially quote-unquote defense in the game. And an anti-cast is the number of points spent to essentially try and deflect a potential combat cast. So it works as a modifier against the combat cast of whatever unit's firing at it. So they use these telepoints to allocate to different activities in each phase. And so there's basically 3 phases to the tactical turns, the tac turn, if you will. There's the execution phase. There's the plot phase, the first execution phase, and the second execution phase. So each star force has to allocate has a total number of points that they have to allocate in each, or across both phases. The Stargate, on the other hand, has 64 telepoints that it can allocate to each execution phase. So the Stargate can't move, but it has powerful combat casts that it can do. And so essentially what will be happening is these guys try and work their way closer to the Stargate to try and capture it. The Stargate's going to be flashing combat casts every execution phase. And the way that these guys can avoid that is that the Stargate doesn't know exactly where in space these star forces are. They know which direction they're coming from because you have to place them on the map, but they don't know what mini light Zulu coordinates these star forces are in. And when you do a combat cast, it's a three-dimensional attack, but it can either go positive, in this case up from the plane of the table, or negative, which is down. So it can go to a +5 or -5 mini light Zulu. So that's the question. So what you want to do is make sure you don't have all these guys stacked in the same mini light Zulu. You want to spread them out as quickly as you can into different areas. So as the Stargate starts combat casting them, they'll be in different areas and potentially either above or below the cast of the Stargate. And even more importantly, if you spread them all out, the Stargate only has 2 potential casts. They can actually do up to 12 potential casts per turn to try and get a wider area. But the more they're casting in more different directions, the more likely it is that they're going to be missing your assaulting star forces. So the way I read in the designer notes is that's basically what happens. It becomes this game of this kind of dance as the attackers try and work their way to the Stargate. The reason these guys are all stacked together is if you're shifting in to a location using a gate shift where you all shifted from the same coordinates in the origination hex to the same coordinates in the destination hex, they all have to come on here together. So if these guys had shifted in from different locations, they could be scattered around the borders of the TAC map. Unfortunately, since they all came in together, they all have to arrive in the same space. So, or I think they have arrive in the same space or within 1 light Zulu of each other. So, or I guess mini light Zulu since we're on the TAC map. So I just put them all in the same space because they're going to all be shifting modes and starting to move out. What'll happen is that the best thing that the Stargate can do is just do 2 full combat casts in that direction, 1 positive, 1 negative, to try and maybe hit some of these guys as they disperse. The maximum range for a combat cast is 5 mini light Zulus, which can get out here to the edge, but is going to be reduced in those at that extreme range because moving out 5 hexes horizontally versus 5 hexes vertically is more than 5 is a distance greater than 5. So they're only going to have an effect. Say this guy does a combat cast, full 64-point combat cast in direction 9, which you can see these little arrows here. I'll zoom in on that so you can read it. The little numbers with the arrows pointing out, that's the clock direction, which is your directional coordinates for everybody on the map for your combat cast. So if this guy writes out a combat cast, which in this case I've plotted here on the plotting sheet, if he plots out a combat cast of 64, you can see there in column F, 64C is combat cast, P for positive, 9 for clock direction. So he's going to do 1 64-point cast in direction 9, positive for the first execution phase. For the second execution phase, he's going to do a 64-point cast, negative 9, which is, again, directly in the 9 is the direction right towards the attacking star forces. So the issue is that at this extreme range, it's only going to have a 2 Zulu level effect. Anything higher than, so for the positive cast, anything higher than a +2 Zulu is not going to get hit at all. Anything lower than a -2 Zulu for the negative cast is not going to get hit. So if these guys are at either +3 or +4 Zulus or -3 or -4 Zulus, they're going to get totally missed on that first combat cast. And of course, when you're playing this opposed, your opponent's not going to know what specific mini light Zulu these guys are going to be at. So as it turns out here, these guys are fortunate that they're actually at +5. They all came in at a +5, and they'll be moving off to +4 Zulus. So generally, it's a good idea to be at those higher or lower Zulus. You wouldn't want to come in here within that combat cast range of an opposing Stargate, because if you're within that if you come in at 0, 1, or 2, either positive or negative Zulus, you have a chance of getting hit by a enemy Stargate that's casting towards you. So, but the Stargate can't do anything else, so it might as well take a speculative combat cast in that first tack turn. So I've got all my moves plotted out for the first tack turn. The Alpha Centauri StarForce is going to move here with a 2 Zulu shift, which is within his 5 mini light Zulu shift range. So that's plotted out on the sheet here in column E there. He starts at 210/-5. He's doing a 30-point tack shift. Actually, not 361. He's going to, 360. He's doing a 30-point tack shift to 360/-3, and then he has 2 points left over for the anti-cast in a combat, or rather stellar mode. You have 32 points to shift. So, and then he'll probably switch to combat mode for the next attack turn. All the other guys up here, you can see A through D, they all started at 552/+5. They're all doing a mode shift, and to switch from stellar mode to battle mode takes half of your telepoints, and then the other half they're going to use to shift 1 mini light Zulu. As you can see, they're all shifting to different hexes, but all down to a +4 range, because you can't shift higher than +5. So that will be the first tack turn when these guys all shift. And then that'll be followed by the combat cast, or all simultaneous to the combat cast from the Stargate, which will end up missing them. And then after that, we move to the next tack turn. At the end of the second tack turn, you can see I'm working on getting these Star Forces spread out, so they're not in the immediate combat cast range of the Stargate. Of course, I mean, the Stargate will be casting around with varying at varying levels in an attempt to try and hit these Star Forces. But ideally, if I have them all sitting at different Zulus, then that will protect them, because the cast can only either be positive or negative from the plane of 0 for the Stargate. So as they work their way in, they'll try and get closer and closer. Some of them will probably end up getting hit. And when you get hit, you're either neutralized or randomized, which essentially knocks you out of the combat. I think randomized randomly shifts you to a different location. Within the TAC map, I'm not sure. I've really only read the rules for the main map for randomization. I can't remember here if it ends up shifting you out of the battle or not. And then neutralized means you're essentially rendered inoperable. So they'll work on shifting their way closer and closer to the Stargate. Once they can get adjacent to it, then they can neutralize it. This guy, the defending unit for Alpha Centauri, shifted up here and did a combat cast at 7, which came out all along these hexes. Unfortunately for this guy, he's at Zulu level -5, and his cast only goes, or is he? No, he's at -3, which means his cast, if he does a positive cast, it only goes up to +2, and these guys are all at +4, putting them outside of the cast range. So, so he's going to have to adjust his mini light Zulu position in order to have a chance at hitting these guys, assuming they stay where they're at. Now, that's the game of chicken, or the guessing game. When you're playing opposed, And here I'm just shifting these guys as though they have no knowledge of what the other opponent's positions are. Just trying to make the best possible shifts for each guy individually in relation to where I think, or where I would think that these guys would actually be. Well, I know where the gate is. So that's the danger of the gate, is that you know it's at 0, so it can hit you whether it goes positive or negative, and you know it can run, since it has 64 telepoints per execution turn, or execution phase, to combat cast. You know it can do a full cast in a single direction. So you want to make sure that you're on the end and the outer ranges of that cast, and then start working your way in from many different directions, so that it has to dilute those telepoints, because it can do one full 64 telepoint cast per execution phase. But if you want to do more casts in different directions, you have to start splitting those points up, and that weakens your combat casts, which ultimately weakens the chances of them actually hitting. Because even if these units start falling within the cast range of the Stargate, they could end up not getting hit, since you're drawing on the combat cast resolution table here, based on, and I'll start anti-casting and things like that too once I start moving these guys in closer. Then you'll start getting differentials of weaker cast values here, which means you can see here there's a lot of no results. The weaker your cast level gets, and you can see that the highest is 32. So a full strength combat cast from the Stargate would be on this table if there's no anti-cast taking points off. But as you can see, the results when it gets weaker are pretty low, but as it gets higher, the results can be pretty bad. So that's where you get into randomization there, or disruption. And disruption is where you're not essentially killed, but you're weakened. You have fewer telepoints to use on a particular turn. So it just becomes a matter of maneuver and trying to get these guys spread out as much as possible, and then they all start working their way in to try and get adjacent to the Stargate. So, and with this one guy defending here, now these guys, as they start to deal with him, will start casting on their during their execution phases as well. So they'll just start trying to cast at each other and hit each other, and see what happens there. So on and on it will go in such a manner. You can see more shifts for this past turn. And again, if you haven't read the rules, this just looks like complete gibberish, but this is the heart of the game right here, which is your plotting. And ideally these should all be on the same number column. The thing is that these guys, the four Sol system units A, B, C, and D, had their gate shift on the main map here before the Stargate and the defending force ever did anything. So there was like several columns behind. What I should have done was just actually start them all on the TAC map on the same column. Then they would be all matched up. But I didn't, and I didn't want to waste more lines, so it goes. Anyway, this will continue on. I will probably not do a turn-by-turn sequence of this, because you can see it's probably going to be fairly boring, since it's just going to be moving, plot, shift, cast, dancing their way towards the center. So I'll probably just come back and do a wrap-up of whether the Sol system star forces are able to actually reach and neutralize the Stargate, thus completing the scenario. Alright, this is basically the end of the scenario. And the scenario requirement was to neutralize the Alpha Centauri Stargate at the end of 4 TAC turns. And actually on the 4th turn, I did get a friendly Star Force onto the Stargate, into the Stargate's mini Light Zulu which effectively neutralizes it. The other way to neutralize it would have been to have either neutralized or randomized, or whatever you call it, the enemy StarForce here. But basically these guys were combat casting at each other, but not getting full enough results. They're actually a 4 mini light Zulu distance from each other on the map here, because they're 1 hex away, but then 4 Zulus away, which is a true distance of 4 mini light Zulus. So when you are 4 Zulus away from each other and combat casting, that effectively reduces your your casting ability, or the number that you're casting at, that you use in the combat cast resolution table. So you end up, even though they're right next to each other, it's actually kind of hard to hit each other when they're as far away on the Zulu scale, or the Zulu level, the far away in 3-dimensional space as they are. So, but the others, like I said, continued my process of sort of diffusing off in different directions and trying to come at the Stargate from multiple directions. So that's what happens. This was not as it says in the scenario, this was not a balanced scenario. So the expectation is that the Earth forces will end up winning over the Alpha Centauri forces, and indeed that's what happened. As you can see, the final log, I ended up, like I mentioned in the previous segment, ended up just sliding over. That's what those long arrows there and those bottom columns are, sliding over so that everything was on the same column to do the plotting, and then ended up starting 2 new columns for that 4th turn. So it definitely took some work getting used to the plotting in 3-dimensional space. But once you kind of get the hang of it and understand what each of these hexes is representing and where you're placing these units within that 3-dimensional space, the tables and everything make sense. For calculating your true distance of measuring the number of hexes away versus the number of Zulus, difference between the two, which is your Zulus are your vertical position within a hex. So this chart helps you figure out your true distances. The combat is your maximum shift table on how many light Zulus your units can shift. That's for use on the larger map here. Your combat cast resolution table here is these are your differences between you take the combat cast number or combat cast value and subtract the anti-cast value of the defending unit from it. There's your attenuation table, and this is the power of a combat cast based on distance. So if you use your full 64 televalue your combat televalue, and you're in the same mini light Zulu, that's going to be a full 64 point cast, which is going to be almost certain randomization. Whereas if you're doing a full 64 point cast, but your distance is 3 mini light Zulus, 4 or 5, you can see it gets really weak when you start to get farther and farther away. So your units want to try and get right on top of each other within that 3-dimensional space to maximize the values of their combat cast. Because remember, whatever combat cast value number you end up with, it could be reduced even further by an anti-cast calculation. So things to keep in mind when you're trying to execute combat in here. So, but like I said, these charts all kind of made sense, or started to make sense after kind of playing through it a little bit. That was the intent of the Alpha Centauri scenario. And there's actually a lot of scenarios in the game. There's your intros, the Alpha Centauri one, but then all these sort of go through this kind of fictional science fiction universe that Simonson came up with. And so you've got the Second scenario, again, this is more humans fighting each other. These two different leagues, and I forget what they are, the PHH and the HL. And I really don't remember what those stand for there. PHH, the Pan-Human Hegemony, and the Human League, which isn't that like a really bad 80s band. So these are your two human factions that fight each other, and there's several scenarios that have different their different campaigns where they're fighting each other, and it expands the number of stars that you're using on the large strategic map. Starting with scenario 5 is when you start bringing in alien forces, the Lachal Da. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce that. I have no idea. And here you've got even more stars and stargates, and then star forces on the map. So there would be, a lot more strategic movement, as opposed to just leaping right for the first stargate and trying to kill everything there. And then, each of these will have some different special rules and things like that. By phone ringing. And let's see. The Lachalda scenario, that's the first one, and then more interhuman fighting. In the 7th scenario, I think this is again more humans revolting, and then here, this in the scenario 8 and brings in the first contact with the Rame, which is another alien faction in the game, and it goes through various scenarios, and as you can see, they get longer with a lot more forces involved. In fact, here you've got Human League players, the Pan-Human Hegemony player, and the whatever the PSL is. I think that's like a Rame Lachalda combined faction. And so you can see here there's different variants and things. So you have a 2-player variant to that, and then various special rules revolving around alliances and the different races, because this is actually a 3-player scenario. So, and it notes on here, these 3-player games. And then here, starting with scenario 13, you have the first of the xenophobe incursions, where you've got then sort of the allied human and early alien factions, along with these mysterious xenophobes that come in from farther away. So, and then scenario 14, the second xenophobe incursion, and this one I think has a ton. Yeah, there's this whole section on special rules for the xenophobe scenarios. Because they're coming from unknown space, so you've got rules for dealing with unknown space, effects of unknown space on shifting and things like that. Looks like they've got hidden movement here. I don't know if that's a case of, because you never know really where anybody is, even though their counters are on the map. You don't know where they are in 3-dimensional space. So I don't know if the hidden movement is a way of actually removing counters from the map. So that people really have no idea, not only what 3-dimensional space you're in, but what even hex you're in. And wow, that's that hidden movement. That's a long section of special rules there, which I haven't actually read. I don't know when I'll get around to playing these additional scenarios, given how long it took me just to play the first one. But there's more different combat resolution rules. Lots of first game turn rules for some of these. And then there's optional rules, also, which I didn't use in this that initial scenario. But you've got optional rules for reserve star forces, and then all the different limitations involved there. And something called faker forces, which I think is where kind of like dummy counters on the TAC map, which you can move around and have effect on, but they're like a bluff, like a dummy counter force. So I didn't play with that either. Gate link, not even sure what this is. Looks like stargates may be linked together in a chain, like arrangement of gate to gate to gate shifts. Okay, so I think gate link creates like super gate assisted shifts. You know, on the strategic map for the Alpha Centauri scenario, I used a gate shift to get the human players immediately to Alpha Centauri from Sol, which ordinarily would have taken more than one regular shift. But by gate shifting, that extended their shift range enough that they could just jump right there. So I'm guessing that gate link is something like that, that offers an extended ability to shift much further. Situational continuity, that I really don't know. Players may continue combat situations from game turn to game turn until they resolve naturally. So this would be no forced resolution based on scenarios. Looks like you can just play things out to the end. Battle mode crew fatigue. This one might have been actually interesting to use because it talks about within the science fiction created for this particular game, this whole idea of telesthetics. The telesthetic crews of Star Forces suffer from great fatigue if the Star Force is in battle mode on 2 or more consecutive game turns. And that would be a huge deal in tactical battles, because you think about the battle that I just fought here, was 4 tac turns, and if they can't be in battle mode for more than 2 of those without suffering penalties, that could be a real problem. So that actually might have been kind of interesting and a kind of neat, you know, realistic element to the sci-fi factor of the whole idea of these telesthetic, you know, quote unquote pilots that are moving these star forces around. So here that just goes over the effects. The other big thing that I could have done, since I was playing solo, was doing sequential play, where instead of doing plotted movement, everybody just moves in sequence. So that's sort of a way to play the game solo without having to do the plotted movement. Or if you just don't like doing plotted movement, you can actually just move within sequence. So Star Force A would go, then B, then C, then D, etc. And I think you can actually do that for the advanced game combat too. So players make their combat cast alternately, 1 unit at a time. The unit furthest from the center of the display makes its cast first, and then work its way in. So, and then there's a whole section here of the rescue mission solitaire game where you have to like move a certain number of Star Forces out of a particular system. And then there's also a rule in here for verbal plotting, which seems like it would be impossible to me. I mean, it was hard enough to keep stuff straight, just actually writing it down. So trying to keep it on your head just seems nuts to me. So, and then there are player's notes, and there's a whole section here on the science fiction used in the game. But otherwise, that's it. That is a look at StarForce Alpha Centauri.